You practice meditation consistently, and you have to do it consistently. You have to do it consistently. That's why I say here that to learn, this is a meditation class, right? To learn how to meditate takes 5 minutes. So why keep coming to a meditation class every week, right? Because if you keep coming to the class every week, you will be starting to establish a pattern. You'll be and you will be encouraged to practice every single day, because of what I will tell you is that for meditation to work, for it to do what it can do, you've got to do it every single day. It's really, really no different than brushing your teeth. If you don't brush your teeth every day, you're going to have cavities. If you don't practice anything every day that you want to be good at, you're never going to be good at it. So the idea is to be good at this, to be good enough at the practice of meditation, and to learn about the teachings that are the foundation of the practice of meditation, so that at some point the practice begins to naturally extend itself into the way you're being in your life. You start noticing that there is an awareness now, and this awareness that is your actual nature, is separate from the thinking activity. Whereas the identity that you typically have, that human beings typically have, is not separate from the thinking activity. It's actually generated by the thinking activity. So now you have this awareness, and I was talking in the last class about how to deal with fear or strong emotions. One of the things I was trying to make a clear distinction about is, in order to effectively deal with the mental condition and the emotional states that arise, right? In order to effectively deal with that, there has to be something that's not part of it. The awareness has got to be separate from it. You've got to be able to look at the thinking activity instead of be the thinking activity. You've got to be able to understand that if I can look at my body, I must not be the body. If I can look at my thought process, I must not be the thought process, which means that I must not be the thinker of the thoughts, because the thinker of the thoughts is a thought. The thinker of the thoughts is a thought that got generated in the thought process, and then because that thought occurred, and one of the ways that we relate to thinking is that we don't question it, we don't realize that thinking is not factual, it's not reality, it's an interpretation of reality given by conditioning, right? And so because we don't realize that, we relate to thinking as if when I think something, the thinking that's occurring is a reflection of reality. That when I think something, it's true, right? When I think something is true. When I think that who I think I am is me, the person, and me, the body, I automatically believe that's true. And I start living my life as that. I take on that identity and I live my life as that identity, right? And because I am being that identity, this is what I was trying to get across last time. Because I was being that identity, I have no place from which to deal with that identity, because I'm inside it. I'm being it, I'm inside the situation. I can't do anything about it because I am being it. So in order to do anything about it, I have to recognize that there's something that's not part of this. The awareness is separate from the personality. The awareness is separate from the thinking activity. The awareness is separate from the emotions. The awareness is separate from the body. And once that starts to get noticed, and once that starts to develop in terms of there's a gradual shifting from being this identity that's given by thought to being this identity that is not given by anything, it exists of itself. It exists of itself. It's self-generated, right? It's a miracle. It exists by itself, right? Once that starts to get established, what becomes available is you can now begin to deal with the effects of the thoughts and the effects of the feelings on the experience you're having of your life. Why? Because that's where the suffering is coming from. The suffering is coming from unrealistic thoughts, reactive thoughts that are coming from the idea that you are the thinker of the thoughts. See, if you are the thinker of the thoughts, you're inside the system. You can't do anything about the system from inside the system. You may be able to make minor changes, but not much. right? You can't see the system function, you can't see the system operating from inside the system, right? So you have to be somewhere away from it to see it, right? And when you start to experience that you are somewhere other than that to see it, you can start to deal with it. You can start to pay attention to it and start to see when it's off the rails. You can start paying attention to it and start to witness the effect that it has on you. You can start witnessing the effect that it has in terms of that certain thoughts stimulate the nervous system, right, and cause upset to occur, or cause fear to occur, or cause worry to occur, or cause stress to occur, right, and cause you to be crazy, cause you to act crazy. What do I mean by that? Well, you're acting crazy because you're being something you're not, and you're relating to life as something that it's not. That's crazy, right? If you're being something that you're not and you're relating to life as if it's something that it's not, that's crazy. And the more you attempt to get that situation to work, the worse it gets, the more frustrating it gets. The more different ways you come up to try and get your life to work, every time you think that you've got it together, or every time you think it's working, it falls apart again. Or some new situation. Because why? Because of impermanence, because everything's constantly changing. There's no stability. Same thing is true with your personality and the thought process and your emotions. It's constantly changing. There's no stability. There's no way to control it. It's circumstantial. It's being caused by a cause and effect reality that's way beyond you, right? What do I mean by that? Well, the cause and effect reality, one way of talking about it is certain causes and effects determined who your parents were, right? Certain causes and effects determine what they experienced. Certain causes and effects determine how they behaved with you, right? You could keep, and then their parents and their parents' parents, right? And where their parents lived, what country they come from, so all of these things, I mean, you can see it in nature as well, you know, cause and effect, right? So what it boils down to is that the experience you're having as a person that has free will and that has control and that can determine what's happening and make things go your way is an illusion. It's an illusion. This is why David Radin last night, one of the things he was alluding to, he doesn't come right out and say no free will, or he doesn't come right out and say no, you know, predetermination, you know. Sometimes he'll say thy will be done, right? But what he's getting at there is this is important for you to come to understand, because if you understand it, you realize that there is no reason, it's unrealistic for you to feel guilty about anything that's happened in your life. Or anything that you've done that you think that you made a mistake and you did something wrong or you hurt people or whatever the case may be, right? The truth is, had nothing to do with you. That's the truth, had nothing to do with you. On the other hand, anything that you did that you're proud of, that you think you accomplished, had nothing to do with you. It was all cause and effect, right? So you have that reality operational, and if you can get that, if that's worth getting, right? Because if you can get that, it can free you up from a lot of suffering right there in terms of what you think you did that's wrong and so forth, right? But the reality of it is, even if you get that, while you're relieved of the guilt or the shame, or you're relieved of the pride that you think you're great and all that stuff from the past, at the same time that's the case, you still have to deal with the fact that in the immediate reality, right, you still have to make choices and you still have to make decisions. You still have to govern, your behavior and what you're doing. So how do you get that to fit the idea that everything is predetermined, right? It's a paradox. It's a paradox. And if you understand the truth, you're able to straddle that paradox. You're able to be unattached and relieved and not allow yourself to feel pride or guilt about anything once it's happened. But before it happens, right, there's always the possibility of something, or it occurs to you, it appears, right, that there's the possibility of your being able to make a difference. You're being able to change something about the way you are, the way you behave, right? But that's not actually true. The reality of it is that's why I can say to you, the fact that you're here right now, right, the fact that you come to this class, right, is no accident, right? It's an indication that for whatever the reason is, for whatever the cause and effect reality is, right? That there have been causes and effects that ended you up sitting here right now, ended you up being interested in this subject right now, and ended you up in a process where you can experience a complete transformation of who you are, where you can experience freedom from suffering, so you can consider it a blessing that you're here. Maybe, maybe. Depends on whether it occurs to you that this opportunity is important enough that you invest enough of your energy and you make a deep enough commitment to the practices necessary to realize the possibility, right? Or it may not happen like that. You may be here and just never get to the point where you take it to that level, and so you don't get the benefit of having taken it to that level and experience the real freedom that's available. And so as you sit there and you listen to me talk, right, the process of thinking that's occurring for you, the process of emotions that's occurring for you will interact with what I'm saying, right, and produce a result in terms of whether you practice meditation every day, whether you take the time and use the energy to study this subject that we're talking about here. And if you do, if that occurs, right, then what will happen is you will start to notice you have the ability to relate to the thinking activity and the emotions and the circumstances of your life in a way where they stop determining your experience. That you will then discover the possibility that you can relate to the thinking activity and the emotions and the circumstances in your life in such a way where it stops determining your experience of your life as a human being. That's the payoff, that's the possibility, right? That you can start being less crazy, that you can start being less reactive, that you can be more comfortable in your body, that you can feel at home in life, that you can actually enjoy being alive. And there's a place from which that you can look at your life and look at your experience of your relationships and look at your experience of being in this body from a point of view that frees you from suffering. And you can do this, you can begin to practice this specifically once you start to catch on, when you start to catch on. You know, I know that there are some of you who have been coming here long enough now and have heard me talk about this enough that you've kind of caught on a little bit. You know, you start to catch on to it, right? And when you start to catch on to it, you start paying attention to your moment-to-moment experience, monitoring whether you're going off the rails, monitoring whether you're paying attention to the thinking activity and believing what it's saying like it's true, and starting to pay attention to it with an awareness that it's not true, right? And starting to pay attention to it and looking at what's happening in the world and seeing, wait a minute, I'm seeing what's happening in the world and I'm seeing the interpretation of it, and I can see there's a difference here. The interpretation of what's happening is not the same as what's happening. And the interpretation of what's happening is stimulating my nervous system in a way that's causing me to be uncomfortable and feeling like I should fight or run, right? But when I start to be aware of that from outside the system, when I start to see that from awareness, right, then I stop following it. I stop identifying with the thinking activity and I stop identifying with the emotions, right? I start paying attention and I start realizing that if I don't follow it, if it comes up, if the thoughts and the feelings come up and I don't follow it and I just watch it, I just look at it, right? It starts to diminish in its intensity. It starts to diminish in its intensity, and I start having a better time in my life. I stop acting out in ways that cause problems in my relationships, right? And I start relaxing more, and because I'm more relaxed and calmer, I start noticing things about life that I didn't notice at all before. Little things, you know, nature, you know, babies, you know, animals, you know, start noticing little things that I didn't pay any attention to before. And I realized my life was a lot richer than I knew it was before because of this difference that occurs from this transformation that's occurring, from this awakening that's occurring, because I'm beginning to realize I was confused. I'm not who I thought I was. And who I am has power. Who I am has the power of consciousness to see what's really going on. And because I start to see that, I start to pay attention, and I start to realize that if I keep doing this, if I keep doing this, I can get to a point where the circumstances that occur in my life no longer determine my experience. That's the fulfillment of the possibility, you know, that my body could be sick, my body could be dying, I could get old, I could be poor, I could have difficult circumstances occur in my life, right? But my experience of myself and my life won't be determined by that. You know, my Zen teacher, an example of this, right, because he's a model, you know, people who have been doing this work are modeling the possibility, right? So he's a model of the possibility, right? And one of the things that happened in his life was that he came home one night and his house was on fire, like fully on fire, right? And his wife was traveling, so she was away. And so he just pulled up, and the house is on fire. The fire company came, and they came over to him, and they said, "This is your house?" And he said, "Yes." And they said, "Is there anybody in there?" And he said, "No." And they said, "Well, it's too far gone for us to try and put the fire out. We're just going to let it burn." And so he just shook his head, and a reporter from a local newspaper came over to him and said, "Oh, is this your house?" And he said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, how does it feel to stay in here and watch your house burn?" And he just looked at her and he said, "Do you have any popcorn?" That's a model of the possibility, you know, that you could stand there watching your house burn down with all your belongings on fire, and the only thing you're interested in is could you have some popcorn so you could enjoy the show, right? So, you know, when you hear something like that, it's almost unbelievable. Do you know what I mean? It's almost, if you think about it, if that was my house, I'd be freaking out, right? So one of the things that happens if you practice this, right, is that you begin to see that it does work. You begin to see that it does make a difference. And the only way that you can get good at this and practice this is you have to start with the small stuff, right? Because if you go right to try and practice with the big stuff, right, it won't work. Because the big stuff is just too overwhelming. It just takes you over, right? So if you go to practice with the big stuff, you'll say, "Oh, that stuff doesn't work," you know, and you'll give up. But if you understand that you have to start small, you practice with the small annoyances. Practice with annoyances. Practice with driving your car and being annoyed by traffic, right? Or practice with the weather, right? Or practice with, you know, little things that happen, you know, the smallest things, you know. One of the things that I mentioned here, well, you know, the smallest things, you know, I live in an older house. When you turn the hot water on, it's not hot right away, right? So I notice I'm standing there being pissed off at the water. That's insanity. That's insanity, right? So that's an example of what I'm talking about. You know, and until I practiced meditation, until I studied these teachings, I would have never noticed that. I would have believed that it makes sense to be mad at the water, right? Or do you ever go and you're coming out of a room and you push the door to close and it doesn't close, and you look back and the door didn't close, and you get pissed off because the door didn't close? You're pissed off at a door, right? But you see, we live our lives so glued into the idea that this is true, that I should be pissed off at the door. I should be angry at the weather, right? I should be annoyed at the traffic, right? I should be upset about these things that, you know, if I flush the toilet and I have to flush it again because it didn't work, that's annoying. That's annoying. Do you understand? If that's annoying, if something that small is annoying, can you get an idea of what that means about the life you're living? If something that small is annoying, can you get an idea about the life you're living? What's going to happen when something really big goes down? You know, when something really big goes down, when you get a serious diagnosis, or when you have a serious accident and your body gets hurt, or when you find out that your partner is having an affair, you know, what's going to happen when somebody close to you suddenly dies in an accident? All of these things are part of the reality of a human life. They're bound to happen. They're bound to happen, right? And if you start to pay attention to your life right now as it is, you'll notice that there is suffering going on. There's suffering going on. What's the suffering about? Well, probably it has something to do with your relationships. Almost everybody has complaints about their relationships, right? Probably has something to do about your money. Almost everybody's got complaints about their money, right? Even billionaires have complaints about their money, right? Because the government wants to take too much of it for taxes, right? And they have to worry about going to jail because they're cheating on the taxes because they can't stand paying that money to the government. So no matter how much money you have, it's still a problem, you see? So if you pay attention to your life and you start to notice the things that are there that are causing suffering, and you're considering that suffering to be a function of those things. You're considering the suffering to be a function of those people, of the government, of the circumstances. You're not considering the possibility that suffering is a function of the way you're relating to that stuff, not that stuff. The suffering is a function of the way you're relating to your life, not life. Life is not causing you any suffering. Life is not the source of suffering. Life isn't even difficult. Life is nothing. Life is nothing. It's just what's happening. That's all it is. It's just what's happening. Right? But once it gets processed in the brain, it's not just what's happening anymore, right? Because it's not just what's happening. It's happening to me. It's happening to me, and I don't like it unless it's what I want to happen to me, right? So this is common. This is the ordinary everyday life that most people are living, and they're convinced that the only way to resolve it, the only way to end the suffering is to control the circumstances. To control the circumstances. And that doesn't work. And even though it doesn't work, they never give up because they don't think there's any alternative, right? Even though it doesn't work, they never give up because they don't think there's any alternative. So then they just keep changing the game they're playing, right? I was trying to be happy by having the right amount of money, but then I started to realize that no matter how much money I made, it was never the right amount of money. I was trying to be happy by finding the right person that I would always be in love with and I would never have conflict with, and we would just be happily ever after. But I never found anybody, and I've been married 5 times, right? And it's costed me a lot of money, right? I mean, if you start to pay attention, you can start to realize that your life is a repetitive pattern of failures. And you can keep changing the game. Oh, I won't try and be happy from money anymore. I'll try and be happy from being special, right? And so I'll get a lot of tattoos. Right? You just keep changing the game, right? So at some point, if you're fortunate, if you're blessed, you start to realize, wait a minute, something must be fundamentally wrong here, because no matter how many ways I attempt to get my life to work and be happy, it keeps failing. It keeps failing. Something must be fundamentally wrong here. Yes, and what's fundamentally wrong here is the confusion you're suffering about who you are and about what's real. And unless that gets straightened out, unless you wake up, that's why we talk about waking up. Unless you wake up and see things as they are, unless you wake up and realize that who you are is already happy, who you really are is already happy, but you're not available for that. You're too busy. You're too busy playing the game trying to be happy to stop and slow down and consider the possibility that what I really am is already happy, but I don't know what I really am. I only know who I think I am, and that's what I'm playing with, and I only know what I think life is, and that's what I'm dealing with, and so I just keep trying to win that game. Unfortunately, for most human beings, that's the beginning and the end of the story, for most human beings. But if you're listening to me talk right now, and you've been interested in this subject, and you're practicing meditation, and you're studying these teachings, right? It means that this possibility has become available to you. And then the question becomes, how are you going to relate to it? Are you going to understand that this possibility can make your life a fulfillment, that this possibility can make your life heaven on earth, the kingdom of heaven on earth, that's what they're talking about? That's what the teachers are talking about? Do you realize that's really possible for you? And if you realize that's really possible for you, are you willing to act on it? Are you willing to do what you can possibly do to realize that? That's an important question for you to entertain, you know? And where are you at in relationship to this practice and these teachings? Where are you at in relationship to it? You know, when you leave here or when you stop listening to what I'm saying right now, what happens to it? What happens to it? Does it just go in the background and you go right back into being an asshole? Does it go in the background and you go right back into being crazy again and complaining about the weather and the politics and all the rest of it, right? What happens to it? It's very important to pay attention to what happens to it, you know? If that doesn't happen to it, it means that you're starting to catch on, you know? Because if you really get this, if you really understood this, if you really get what this makes possible, this would be the most important thing in your life. There's no doubt about it. There's no question about it. That's one of the ways you can know whether you're getting the message, whether you're getting the invitation to the possibility. If you really get the invitation to the possibility, what you realize is there's nothing more important than this, because your life depends on it. Your life depends on it. Your happiness depends on it. Your ability to relax and to accept life on life's terms depends on it. So that's something that I want to leave you with, you know. Take a look and see where you're at about what I've been talking about. Where are you at about the practice of meditation? Do you see what it really makes available to you, and are you willing to act on it? That's what I want you to consider very seriously.